I noticed the bruise before I noticed my own breathing. It hid under Lily's hairline, a dull violet mark near her right temple. A normal mom might have blamed the playground. A normal life would have made that easy, but our life had been running on quiet fear for so long that even small things felt like alarms. It was 6:10 p.m. in our San Diego apartment, and the kitchen counter looked like a ledger of failure. An orange prescription bottle and a stack of overdue bills. My autoimmune flare-ups came in waves, burning joints, and a fatigue so heavy it felt like gravity had doubled. The medication helped, but it also stole hours from me. Some nights I slept so deeply I woke up terrified I'd missed the moment I was supposed to protect my kids. Lily stood still while I smoothed her hair back. That stillness scared me more than the bruise. 9-year-olds usually complain. They pull away. They ask what you're doing. Lily watched my hands like she was watching a countdown, her mouth set in a polite line, like she was trying not to make me any more tired. Sophie was on the rug, coloring with a broken crayon and humming, 4 years old and able to believe that home was just home. Then the lock turned. Dylan Cray came in the way he always did. He carried the outside air with him, salt and car exhaust, and his clothes were too clean for a man who claimed he was only checking in. His eyes did a quick scan. The mess, the bills, my medication, my girls. He didn't have to raise his voice. He had learned that fear worked better when it lived inside you. He started with the same routine. He pointed out what I hadn't done. He implied a real mother would handle things. He let his gaze linger on my pills like he was collecting evidence. Over the past year, he'd become obsessed with reminding me that courts liked stability, that paperwork mattered, that a sick single mom with late rent was an easy story to sell. He never had to say the worst part out loud. My mind supplied it for him. My kids, taken. I hated myself for shrinking. I hated how fast my thoughts turned into survival math. How long until hell leaves? Whether Sophie would cry, whether Lily would look at him and give him a reason to snap. Lily didn't look at Dylan. She looked at the jar on the counter where she kept her coins. For weeks, she'd been saving like an adult, skipping snacks at school, choosing water, acting like every dollar was a decision. When I asked why, she gave me a tight smile and said it was for something important. I assumed it was a toy, a book, a small wish a child deserved. I didn't push. Exhaustion makes you grateful for any quiet. Dylan's phone buzzed. He stepped into the hall to answer, voice lowered. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear the satisfaction, the confidence of someone who believed he was winning. Lily's shoulders tightened as she listened to the muffled tone through the door. I stayed near Sophie, forcing my face into calm. I told myself I would do something tomorrow. I would call a lawyer. I would call a hotline. I would stop letting fear set the schedule in my own home. By 6:45 p.m., Dylan was gone, and the apartment felt like it exhaled. I was rinsing a cup at the sink when I realized the silence had changed. It wasn't peaceful. It was missing something. Sophie was still on the rug. Lily wasn't. My mind tried to soften the blow with excuses. Maybe she was in the bedroom. Maybe she'd slipped to the bathroom. Maybe she'd gone next door. I walked the hall anyway, calling her name, my voice rising each time. The bedroom was empty. Her shoes were gone. Her little backpack was gone too. I turned back to the counter, and that's when I saw the jar tipped on its side. The coins were gone. The envelope was there, worn and creased, like it had been handled and reheated by hope. It was empty. On the flap, in Lily's careful handwriting, she had written that she was going to fix it. Beneath that, she had written that she loved me, like she was trying to hold me together from a distance. My knees went weak so fast I had to grip the counter. My daughter had left with $5 and a plan, and kids don't make plans like that unless they think the adults around them won't save them. I scooped Sophie into my arms, grabbed my keys, and ran out into the evening. The harbor was only a few blocks away. As I sprinted toward the salt air and the darkening waterfront, one thought kept hammering through me, and I was already too late. Lily wasn't going to ask someone safe for help. She was going to ask someone powerful. The harbor always sounded like freedom from a distance. Up close, it sounded like my fear had a soundtrack. My shoes slapped the sidewalk as I ran, Sophie's small body bouncing against my chest with every step. She had started to whimper the moment we hit the stairwell, confused by my urgency, my shaking hands, my breath that kept catching. I kept murmuring to her in the only way I could without turning my panic into hers. I kept promising her we were going to find Lily, like saying it out loud could make it true. The air smelled like salt and fried food from a stand that was already closing down for the night. The sky had that last bruised strip of sunset over the water, orange fading into a deep, tired blue. Streetlights blinked on in a row like someone had lined up warning signs. It was 6:50 p.m., and I was running through the part of San Diego where people came to feel light. Couples strolled with ice cream. Tourists posed with the bay behind them. Kids chased each other under palm trees. Normal life, playing its normal music, while my world ripped in half. I scanned everything like I had a radar built out of guilt. A girl in a pink hoodie. Not Lily. A small ponytail near the railing. Not Lily. A group of kids is weaving through a vendor line. Not Lily. My throat burned. My arms were already aching from holding Sophie, but I couldn't put her down. I couldn't risk losing another child to a crowd. I couldn't risk Sophie wandering toward the street because I was too focused on Lily. The thought made my stomach turn. I was a mother, and somehow tonight I felt like a person who had lost the basic right to call herself one. I forced myself to slow down at the edge of Harborfront Park, not because my body needed it, because my brain did. Panic makes you loud. Loud gets attention. Attention gets you the wrong kind of help. Dylan had trained that into me without ever saying it directly. He had turned my own instincts into something I questioned. He had made me believe that if I drew the wrong eyes, I'd pay for it later. Harborfront Park was wide and open, built for people who wanted to breathe. A winding path, benches facing the water, a patch of grass where someone strummed a guitar softly. Not performing, just existing. It should have felt safe. Instead, it felt like a stage where the lights were about to swing toward my worst nightmare. I saw Lily before I saw the reason my legs went weak. She was near the bay, close to a bench that sat slightly apart from the others. She wasn't running. She wasn't crying. She was standing in that same too-still way I'd seen in the kitchen. Her posture was careful, shoulders squared like she was bracing for impact. And in her hands, held with both palms the way you'd hold something sacred, was the worn envelope, the one that had been empty on my counter. My heart dropped so hard it felt physical. Then I saw him. A man sat on the bench, looking out at the water as if he owned it. Not in a loud way. In a quiet way, that was worse. He wore a dark suit that didn't belong in a place where people wore shorts and sneakers. His hair was neat, his posture relaxed, but nothing about him was casual. Even stillness looked like a decision on him. No visible bodyguards stood behind him, but the space around him was different. People didn't sit on the benches near him. They didn't stop in his line of sight. A couple walking their dog veered to the left without discussing it, like their bodies made the choice before their minds did. 2 teenagers laughed too loudly near the path, and then, as soon as they glanced toward that bench, their laughter thinned out and died. A jogger came up behind him, slowed, then crossed to the far side of the walkway like the air had suddenly changed temperature. It wasn't normal avoidance. It was recognition. It was the kind of instinct humans have around predators they can't name. I'd heard the name Damien Crow before, the way people heard names they weren't supposed to. It floated around the harbor in half-sentences and unfinished warnings. Dock workers used it like a curse under their breath. A cashier at my old job had once said it like, explaining why a man paid cash and never looked anyone in the eye. Even the police, at least the ones people called friends, had a particular carefulness when that name slipped into conversation. Damien Crow. I hadn't wanted to believe men like that existed in real life. Men who didn't need to prove power because the world rearranged itself around them on its own. And now my 9-year-old daughter was standing in front of him with $5 like she was buying salvation. My feet moved before my brain finished screaming. I started toward Lily. Fast. Then slowed again because Sophie shifted in my arms and let out a small cry. People turned at the sound. I swallowed it down, kissed the top of Sophie's head, and adjusted my grip, keeping my face calm even as my insides broke open. I wanted to rush in, scoop Lily up, and run, but something in the scene stopped me. It wasn't just fear of Damien Crow. It was the look on Lily's face. She wasn't pleading like a child. She was presenting herself like someone with a plan, like she'd rehearsed the moment, like she knew that if she looked weak, the world would eat her. That look didn't come from nowhere. It came from my home. It came from nights when Dylan's footsteps meant silence. From mornings when I woke up and saw Lily already dressed, already feeding Sophie cereal, already watching the door like she was the adult. It came from every time I told myself I'd fix it tomorrow. I moved closer, keeping to the edge of the path like I was trying not to be seen, like I was the one sneaking up on danger instead of my child. Damien's head turned slightly, as if he'd sensed Lily long before she stepped into his space. He didn't look startled. He looked interested. His gaze tracked her like he was reading her, line by line, the way Dylan used to read me when he wanted to find my weakness. But there was a difference. Damien's attention didn't feel messy. It felt controlled, focused, like he could choose what he did with what he learned. Lily held the envelope out. I saw her hands tremble, just once, before she steadied them. I saw her chin lift in that stubborn way she had when she didn't want to cry in front of Sophie. Damien didn't snatch it. He didn't lean away. He simply looked at the envelope, then looked back at Lily's face, and something in his expression tightened, not anger, not amusement, something sharper, like recognition. I took another step, and my shoe scraped gravel. His eyes flicked toward me. I froze. For one suspended second, the entire harbor went silent in my head. The water, the guitar, the distant laughter, the wind through the palms, none of it mattered. Only the fact that the man everyone avoided had just seen me, and my daughter was offering him her last $5 like it was a contract. And Lily, brave and doomed and brilliant, was starting to ask him for help. Damien Crow's eyes met mine like I had stepped into a locked room and realized too late who held the key. I stopped. Not because my legs failed, but because my instincts warned me that sudden motion could turn this into something I couldn't undo. Sophie shifted in my arms, warm and heavy, her little fingers twisting my collar. Lily stood a few feet from the bench, holding the worn envelope out with both hands. I forced my breathing to slow and moved closer, careful, keeping Lily within reach. But nothing about Damien felt normal. He sat with an easy stillness that didn't match the way people curved away from him on the path. No one sat near his bench. I had heard his name in harbor whispers, Damien Crow, spoken like a warning you didn't test. Lily spoke, and I understood from her steady tone that she was confirming his identity the way an adult would. She was offering payment the way she'd seen grown-ups do, like money could turn fear into a transaction. I knew the envelope held $5 she'd saved coin by coin. Damien didn't take it right away. He looked at her face, then the envelope, then her face again, as if he were weighing her courage. When he finally accepted it, he did it without hurry, without show. I stepped closer, angling my body so Sophie stayed between Lily and him, not as a shield, but as a reminder. A child, 2 children, a line. Lily continued, and even without catching every word, I caught the logic underneath. She had overheard Dylan once, bragging that even the cops stayed careful around Damien Crow. Lily had taken that single ugly sentence and built a plan. If Dylan lived on intimidation, then she would borrow intimidation from someone bigger. My daughter had been listening. Counting threats, building strategies. While I was trying to survive the next flare-up, she had been surviving the next hour. Damien opened the envelope. His gaze dropped to the contents, and something subtle shifted in him, like a decision locking into place. There was the folded bill, and there was a note in Lily's careful handwriting, letters shaped by someone trying to sound older than she was. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. Lily's face told me. Shame had been pushed aside. Safety had taken over. In my mind, I heard the message as clearly as if my daughter were confessing it into my ear. A man in our life was hurting me, terrifying Sophie, and trapping us with the threat of taking my kids away if we told anyone. The request wasn't dramatic. It was simple. Make him go away. My vision blurred. Rage and grief collided. I had spent months shrinking the truth into something I could carry, calling Dylan loud instead of dangerous, temporary instead of consuming. Now my 9-year-old had written the truth down like a contract because she didn't trust adults to fix it. Damien looked up. His eyes weren't soft. They weren't cruel either. They were focused, as he'd just been handed coordinates. His gaze flicked to me, and I knew he was confirming what he already suspected. I hadn't sent Lily. I hadn't planned this. I hadn't even known. I nodded once because lying felt pointless. Humiliation crawled up my throat. Lily's fingers flexed like she was bracing for rejection. I watched Damien's hand move and, for a heartbeat, I thought he would keep the money. Instead, he placed the $5 back into Lily's palm and curled her fingers around it with a gentleness that stole my breath. The gesture didn't erase who he was, but it drew a line. This wasn't something he wanted to profit from. He asked how she had found him, and Lily explained the overheard phone call, the name said with fear. The way adults treated it like a warning. Damien's attention sharpened. Not at Lily, but at the invisible man behind her words. It was 7:05 p.m. when he pulled a card from his wallet and turned it over to the blank side. He offered Lily a pen that looked too expensive to be anywhere near our lives. Lily hesitated, glancing at me like she was asking permission for the first time all night. I gave her a small nod. She wrote our address carefully. Each number looked like an act of trust. Damien read it once and tucked it away with the note. Then he looked at me with the calm certainty of someone used to being obeyed and conveyed the final instruction. We were going home, we were acting normal, and we were telling no one. As I gathered Lily close and turned her back toward the path, my hands shaking around my children, I understood that I had just accepted help from the one man I'd been taught to avoid, and somewhere behind Damien's stillness, something had already started moving. Behind him, the harbor kept laughing, and I wondered what price a mother pays when her child becomes the first brave one. The walk home felt longer than the run to the harbor, like the city had decided to stretch itself just to test whether my courage would snap. I kept Damien's instruction like a splinter under my skin. Act normal, tell no one. The words followed me all the way back through the streetlights and the smell of the bay. Lily stayed close, too close, her hand wrapped around mine as if she thought letting go would undo what she'd set in motion. Sophie had fallen half asleep against my shoulder, her cheek damp from earlier tears. I tried to be the kind of mother who could turn panic off like a switch. By the time we reached our building, my legs were trembling, not from distance, but from the effort of pretending. The courtyard lights buzzed. Someone's TV flickered blue through a window. It was the same place it had been an hour ago, and yet it didn't feel like mine anymore. I unlocked our door with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The smell inside was stale detergent and the faint chemical bite of my own medication. I forced myself into a routine because routine was camouflage. I turned on the kitchen light. I set Sophie down gently. I asked Lily to help her sister wash her hands like it was any other night, like my daughter hadn't just offered her last $5 to a man the city avoided. Lily nodded. Too quickly. Too obedient. I watched her move around the sink, and I saw the strain in her shoulders. I saw the way she kept her eyes down, as if her gaze could betray her. She was holding a secret bigger than she was, and I hated the world for making her capable of that. I told myself I would talk to her later, when Sophie was asleep, when my voice wouldn't crack. At 8:20 p.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from the apartment's front gate system. Dylan had been let in. My stomach dropped so hard I almost lost my balance. He hadn't texted me. He never did unless he wanted something documented. He preferred showing up like a storm you couldn't plan for. My mind raced through possibilities. Had someone seen Lily at the harbor? Had Dylan followed us? Had he already guessed? I looked at Lily, and I saw her freeze, just for a second, like her body recognized danger before sound reached her ears. I lifted my chin slightly, the smallest signal I could give, and she understood. She pulled Sophie closer and started talking to her sister in a gentle, normal tone about bedtime, about pajamas, about brushing teeth. My daughter was 9 and already knew how to perform safety. There are moments when you realize you have been living in survival for so long that your children can act it better than you can. The knock came. Not a polite tap, a certainty. He didn't wait for permission. He entered like he owned the air. Dylan's eyes flicked over the room, the way they always did, inventorying. The kids. The sink is running. The living room light. My face. His mouth curled into something that was supposed to be a smile but never reached his eyes. He started speaking immediately, and I understood from his tone that he'd spent the last hour winding himself up. He talked about responsibility. He talked about how a mother should look, how a mother should function. He brought up my medicine like it was a punchline, implying that the bottles on the counter said everything a judge would need to know. He didn't need to say the word custody out loud for it to land. He'd been building that threat for months, slipping it into conversations the way a thief slides a blade between ribs. He reminded me that I had missed work. He reminded me that the rent had been late. He reminded me that the school nurse had called once when my flare-up had pinned me in bed, and Lily had brought Sophie to school with her because I hadn't been able to drive. He made it sound like evidence. He made it sound like I was the danger and he was the solution. My hands clenched at my sides. I felt the familiar anger rise, hot and sharp, followed by the familiar fear that smothered it. This was his real power. Not his volume, not his body, his ability to make me doubt myself. Sophie looked up from the couch with wide eyes, sensing the tension. Lily kept her face carefully blank, like she was trying to become invisible. My daughter's new bruise pulsed in my mind like a warning light. I forced myself to move the evening forward. I guided Sophie toward her room. I helped her into pajamas. I checked that she had her stuffed bunny. I kept my voice soft and steady, even as Dylan hovered in the doorway, watching, letting me know he was there. When Sophie finally settled, Lily followed me out into the hall. Dylan remained in the living room, his presence spreading through the apartment like smoke. Lily's gaze flicked toward him, then back to me. I could tell she wanted to tell me everything, not as a confession, but as reassurance. I could tell she wanted to say that she'd done the brave thing and it was going to be okay. That was what broke me, the fact that she thought it was her job to soothe me. I crouched and held her shoulders gently. I told her, in the quietest way I could, that she had to keep tonight locked inside her for now. I told her that no matter what Dylan said, no matter what he tried to pull from her, she had to act like this was a normal night. I told her I was proud of her courage, but I also needed her to let me be the adult now. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She only nodded, lips pressed tight, as if tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. I wanted to take her bruise and put it on my own skin instead. I wanted to go back in time and wake up earlier, fight harder, call someone sooner. But the past didn't care about regret. It only cared about consequences. When I stood, I noticed something outside the window. A car sat down the street, half hidden by a palm tree and a streetlight glare. It wasn't parked in our lot. It wasn't blasting music like the usual neighbors. It was still, idling low, as if it belonged to someone waiting. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was seeing patterns, because fear makes everything look like a sign. And yet, the stillness felt familiar. It felt like the space around Damien Crow's bench. I went back into the living room, my heart trying to climb out of my throat. Dylan was still talking, still circling the same cruelty in different words. He mentioned that he had spoken to someone who knew the system. He implied he could get paperwork started fast. He implied that if I didn't learn to cooperate, I would regret it in a way that couldn't be undone. I made myself nod at the right moments. I made myself look tired instead of defiant, because defiance was what he wanted. He wanted a fight so he could call me unstable. Then his phone rang. Dylan's entire posture changed. The threat in his face shifted into something close to excitement. He stepped toward the window as if he needed space to receive good news, and I watched his eyes sharpen, greedy, almost boyish. He answered with a tone that told me this caller mattered. He listened. He asked a few quick questions. He laughed once, short and disbelieving, as someone had just offered him a miracle. When he ended the call, he looked at me with the kind of satisfaction that made my skin crawl. He told me, in that casual, victorious way, that a job had fallen into his lap. A one-night delivery, easy money, the kind of offer he said didn't come twice. He made sure I understood the number, because Dylan always used numbers like weapons. He said it would pay $10,000, clean and fast, and it would wipe out a problem he'd been complaining about for weeks. My mouth went dry. I didn't know who had called him. I didn't know what the job was. But I knew, with a certainty that settled cold in my bones, that Damien's quiet machinery had already found Dylan. And Dylan, smiling as he'd just won, had no idea he was walking toward a door that might only open one way. I learned that night that waiting can be a kind of violence, not the kind that leaves bruises you can point to, not the kind the world believes without proof. It's quieter. It sits in your chest and refuses to move. It makes every sound in your apartment feel like a threat. It makes you count minutes like they're breaths you might run out of. After Dylan announced his $10,000 miracle job, he paced our living room like a man already spending money he didn't have. His excitement made him careless. He started opening drawers, checking his wallet, tapping his phone screen over and over like he was afraid the offer would vanish if he didn't stare at it hard enough. I forced myself into routine anyway, because routine was the only armor I had. I got Sophie into her pajamas first. I brushed her hair, kissed her forehead, and told her the kind of bedtime reassurance that sounded normal on the surface, but was really me begging the universe to give me one safe night. Her eyelids drooped quickly, trusting the world the way 4-year-olds still can. Lily lingered in the hallway while I tucked Sophie in. She pretended to be interested in the nightlight's soft glow. She pretended her stomach didn't hurt, but her eyes were too awake, too focused. She was watching the future like she expected it to jump out of the dark. When Sophie finally drifted off, Lily followed me into her own room without being asked. She climbed into bed and pulled the blanket up to her chin like she was bracing for a storm. I sat on the edge of her mattress and let my hand rest on her shoulder. I wanted to say 100 things. I wanted to tell her she should never have had to do what she did. I wanted to tell her I was sorry I hadn't protected her sooner. I wanted to tell her I would fix everything. But promises are dangerous when you're not sure you can keep them. So I gave her the only truth that didn't feel like a lie. I told her, in my quiet voice, that she had to sleep now, that tomorrow would come whether we feared it or not, and that I needed her to let me carry the weight for a while. I told her that bravery wasn't her job. Being 9 was her job. Her mouth trembled. She didn't cry. She just nodded, like she was accepting orders from the only person left she could trust. I turned off her lamp and stood in the doorway long enough to watch her breathe. She didn't relax. She held herself tight, as if she were waiting for a sound that would prove she was right about the world. In the kitchen, my pill bottle sat on the counter like a judge's gavel. Bills were stacked beside it, the red stamps screaming. I stared at both and wondered how Dylan had managed to make my illness feel like a crime. Outside, the same car from earlier still sat down the street. I could see its dim dashboard glow through the windshield. The engine wasn't loud, just a low hum, like a heartbeat you could only hear when you were already scared. I told myself again that it could be anyone, a neighbor, a rideshare driver. A couple is talking in their car, but the streetlight reflected off the hood in a clean line, and something about that stillness made my skin prickle. I thought of Damien Crow's bench, that invisible perimeter. The way strangers moved around him was as if the air warned them. I thought of his eyes locking on mine, not with chaos, but with a calm that felt like control. I didn't know what he was doing. I didn't know what kind of help I had allowed into my life. I only knew I had told my daughter to keep silent, and in doing that, I had accepted that something would happen without my permission. Dylan came into the kitchen around 9:15 p.m., already dressed, already energized. He had showered. He had combed his hair. He wore his best jacket like he was going to a job interview instead of whatever shadowy delivery he'd been promised. He told me he was leaving soon, and I heard the triumph in his voice, the way he believed money could erase consequences. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for details. I didn't ask where. Questions could make him suspicious. Questions could make him stay. Questions could make him look at Lily. I just nodded like I was defeated. I let him think he had won. Inside my chest, my heart slammed against my ribs like it was trying to escape. At 9:40 p.m., Dylan finally left. I listened to the sound of his footsteps in the hallway. I listened for the elevator. I listened for the front gate buzzer. I listened until silence filled in every space where sound had been. Then I realized I was holding my breath. I locked the deadbolt. I checked it twice. I checked the window latch. I told myself I was being smart. I told myself I was doing what any mother would do. And still, I felt helpless. I went back to the girls' rooms. Sophie had rolled onto her stomach, clutching her stuffed bunny. Lily lay on her side, eyes open in the dim light, staring at the wall like sleep was a thing other people deserved. I sat beside her and let my fingers brush her hair back, careful near the bruise. She blinked slowly, then looked at me. She didn't say anything, but I felt the question in the way her gaze held mine. Had it worked? Was he going to go away? I swallowed and pressed my lips to her forehead. I let my touch answer what my voice couldn't. When I returned to the living room, I stood by the window again. The car down the street was gone. No tires squealed. No headlights flashed. It simply wasn't there anymore, like it had never been. Like someone had been waiting for Dylan to leave, and the moment he did, the watchers had moved too. My phone sat on the coffee table, dark and silent. I stared at it like it might ring and explain everything. Like Dylan might call and brag. Like the police might call and warn. Like an unknown number might light up and confirm the nightmare. 10:20 p.m. passed. Then 11:05 p.m. No text, no missed call. No furious message from Dylan asking why I wasn't impressed. Just silence. And the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt full. It felt like a decision had been made somewhere I couldn't see, by people who didn't ask permission. I sank onto the couch and wrapped my arms around myself, trying to warm my own skin, trying to quiet the shaking that wouldn't stop. Because Dylan was out there, chasing $10,000 like it was salvation. And I was sitting in the dark, realizing that the most terrifying part wasn't what Damien Crow might do. It was that my life had reached a point where I was hoping someone like him would do it. By 6:30 a.m., the apartment was filled with daylight that felt insulting. I had slept in fragments on the couch, my phone pressed to my chest like it could restart my life. Every small sound outside made my eyes snap open. When I finally sat up, my muscles ached from tension more than anything else. My screen was still blank. No late-night bragging. No angry demand. Just the same empty lock screen I'd stared at for hours. I told myself he was sleeping off a binge. I told myself this was another punishment. Another way to remind me he could vanish and make me panic. But my hands were already calling his number. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. I went to the window and scanned the parking area. His car wasn't there. The absence hit like cold water. No sirens, no flashing lights, nothing dramatic. Something was simply missing. I checked the hallway, half expecting to see his jacket on the hook, his boots by the door, proof that I'd imagined everything. The hook was empty. The floor was clean. Even the air felt different, lighter in a way that made my stomach twist with guilt. I looked in on the girls. Sophie slept with her bunny under her chin. Lily was awake, pretending she wasn't. Her eyes tracked me the moment I stepped into the doorway, searching my face like it held the answer to a question she was afraid to ask. I smoothed her hair back and told her, as steady as I could, that I didn't know where Dylan was yet. I made it clear with my eyes that she could not mention the harbor. She gave me the smallest nod, that soldier-like obedience I hated. By 8:10 a.m., the phone was still silent. Between calls, I checked my balance. My joints throbbed, warning of a flare, but adrenaline kept me upright. I counted seconds, listening for footsteps, like fear had turned me into a smoke detector all night long. I tried one more call, then sat at the kitchen table staring at my pill bottle and the bills. My mind jumped from fear of Dylan to fear of paperwork. If he were gone, would he file something out of spite? Would he claim I kept the kids from him? Would I wake up to an officer saying he'd reported me for kidnapping? The system always felt built for men who knew how to weaponize it. I called the school and said the girls were sick. It was half true. Lily's eyes were too bright. Sophie flinched at every hallway noise, and my own body felt wired and brittle. Around 10:15 a.m., my landlord knocked. He wasn't cruel, just impatient. He asked where Dylan was because Dylan had once tried to charm him into taking his side. I said he hadn't come home. The landlord's face shifted into that careful look people wear when they're deciding whether to step back. He suggested I call the police. So I did. A patrol officer came that afternoon. He asked basic questions, and I answered them the way you do when you're trying not to shake. I described Dylan's car, his clothes, and his habits. I mentioned the sudden job offer without explaining where it came from. I watched the officer's eyes land on my medication and then on my tired face, and I felt that old fear rise again. Later, a detective called, sounding exhausted before we even started. He said Dylan had a history that made disappearances believable. Debt, unstable work, a habit of running when pressure built. He explained, in a flat procedural tone, that adults sometimes left to avoid owing people money. He said they would take a report, but he didn't promise urgency. I felt rage, then relief, then shame for the relief. Because if the system treated Dylan's disappearance as Dylan's mess, it meant he wasn't here. He wasn't controlling the air in my home. He wasn't deciding how loudly my daughters could laugh. That evening, a neighbor mentioned seeing Dylan's car near the bus station before sunrise, parked crooked like the driver had been rushing. She offered it like gossip, but it landed like a story forming around us. A narrative that made sense to everyone except the one person who knew what had been set in motion. Lily heard the neighbor through the thin walls. Afterward, she hovered near me, and I felt her silent question again. Had her gamble worked? I told her, carefully, that sometimes bad people left when they realized the world was bigger than them. I told her we were safe right now, and right now was enough. Night came without Dylan. No pounding on the door, no strings pulled, no threat texts, just silence so wide it made me dizzy. And then, as if the universe wanted to prove I wasn't dreaming, a plain envelope slid under our door. No return address. Inside was a letter on clean letterhead from a neurology clinic. It said my records had been reviewed and I'd been accepted into a treatment support program that would cover my medication for the next year. The language was formal, believable, and full of signatures and phone numbers. My hands shook so hard I could barely hold the paper. Dylan was gone, and the help had already found me. The first time I read the letter, I assumed it was a mistake. The second time, I assumed it was a trap. By the third time, I realized I was stalling because hope had started to feel dangerous. The clinic's letterhead was crisp and official. The language was clean and careful, full of the kinds of phrases people used when they wanted to sound legitimate. It offered real help medication coverage, specialist appointments, support services without asking for anything obvious in return. That alone made my skin prickle. In my world, everything came with a price. Dylan had taught me that. So I did what I always did when fear tried to swallow me. I checked facts. At 9:30 a.m., I called the number printed at the bottom of the page. I expected a robotic voicemail or a shady pitch. Instead, a calm receptionist answered and confirmed my name, my date of birth, and the diagnosis my neurologist had put in my file years ago. She explained, in a professional tone, that I had been selected for a support program tied to a treatment initiative. She offered appointment times. She offered a list of documents to bring. She didn't rush me or talk down to me like I was inconvenient. When I hung up, my hands were trembling, but for a different reason now. This was real. The next few days moved like a dream I didn't trust. A delivery arrived from a specialty pharmacy with my name typed neatly on the label. Inside were medications I had only ever seen listed in online forums, options people said changed their lives. Options my insurance had labeled unnecessary or experimental. The paperwork included approval codes, coverage explanations, and a number to call if anything was damaged in transit. It was so normal that it made me want to cry. I held that box like it was something sacred. Lily watched me from the hallway. She didn't ask questions. She just studied my face, looking for the moment I would admit what we both knew. That something had shifted because of what she did. I wanted to tell her it wasn't her burden. I wanted to make the whole story smaller for her, but the truth was already living in her bones. She had felt the change before I did. She had known the night Dylan vanished that the world was capable of rearranging itself. I took the medication exactly as instructed, and I waited for disappointment. But the fog didn't come the way it usually did. In the mornings, my joints still ached. But the ache didn't own me. It felt like pain with boundaries. Like something I could negotiate with instead of something that demanded surrender. I didn't spend half the day drifting in and out of sleep. I didn't wake up panicked, trying to remember if I'd missed school pickup. Sophie noticed first. She didn't understand clinics or programs, but she understood presence. She understood that I was making pancakes on a weekday, that I was braiding her hair without my hands shaking, that I was sitting with her on the rug long enough to finish a puzzle without needing to lie down halfway through. She laughed more. The light, careless laugh of a child who doesn't sense danger behind every door. Lily noticed too, but her reaction was quieter. Her shoulders lowered, almost imperceptibly, like she was setting down a weight she had been carrying so long she forgot what it felt like to stand without it. I caught her one afternoon staring at me while I washed dishes. Her eyes weren't sad. They were what? As if she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because Lily knew miracles didn't visit our kind of apartment unless someone sent them. When the clinic appointment day arrived, another strange kindness showed up. A black town car pulled up to the curb outside our building, clean and silent, the kind of car that didn't belong in our parking lot. The driver stepped out and held a small sign with my name printed on it, like this was an airport pickup. He explained in a steady, professional way that transportation was included in the program. I should have refused. I should have asked questions. Instead, I looked at my daughter's Lily in her too-old seriousness, Sophie clutching my hand, and I realized I was tired of pride, tired of refusing help, because it didn't match the story I thought I deserved. So I got in. The clinic lobby smelled like lemon polish and coffee. Soft lighting, clean chairs, people speaking in low voices. It wasn't luxury, it was respect. I hadn't felt that kind of respect in a medical office in years. A nurse handed me forms, explained them without impatience, and treated my questions like they mattered. The neurologist spoke to me like I was a person, not a file. I heard the plan laid out in careful terms. Treatment protocol, monitoring, follow-ups, and lab work. I heard her say the program was covering the cost. I heard her say they expected good outcomes. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself imagine a future where my body didn't control every decision. On the ride home, the town car moved smoothly through traffic like the city had opened up a lane just for me. That thought should have made me grateful. Instead, it made me uneasy. Because I remembered the invisible perimeter around Damien Crow's bench. I remembered the way strangers avoided his space like the air warned them. And now, the air around my life was changing too. Over the next week, the pattern continued. A follow-up appointment was scheduled without hassle. A pharmacy refill that arrived before I even realized I was running low. A note from the clinic about a nutrition consult, a support group, and resources that made my life feel managed. Then my landlord called. He didn't sound annoyed this time. He sounded almost polite, like he was speaking to someone he didn't want to offend. He said there had been an issue with our unit, something about upcoming renovations, noise, wiring, and a need to move tenants temporarily. He offered us a different apartment in the building's renovated wing, 2 bedrooms instead of 1, a brighter layout, better locks, a lower rent for the first year, explained away as a construction discount. My throat went dry, because nothing in my life had ever gotten easier without someone choosing it. And as I stood there with the phone in my hand, listening to the landlord explain the opportunity, I understood with a sick clarity that Dylan's disappearance wasn't the end of Damien Crow's influence. It was the beginning, and now I had to decide what it meant to accept miracles that arrived with paperwork and no name. Moving into the renovated unit felt like stepping into a life that belonged to someone braver than me. The paint smelled new. The locks clicked with confidence. Sunlight reached our kitchen table, and I stopped flinching every time the building creaked. I told myself it was just renovations, just a clinic program doing what clinic programs did, but the timing was too perfect to be random. The help arrived in layers, always dressed in paperwork. A specialty pharmacy box with my name typed neatly on the label. A reminder call from the neurology clinic that sounded almost kind. A lease addendum explaining lower rent because of construction inconvenience, even though the inconvenience felt like safety. Each time I signed, my hand shook, and it wasn't pain making me shake anymore. It was gratitude mixed with fear. Sophie adapted fast. She left toys on the rug again and slept more deeply, like she trusted the room to stay ours. Lily changed more slowly. She stopped scanning every hallway shadow, but she still watched the front door, as it might betray us. Sometimes I caught her staring at my pill bottle with an expression that was half relief and half responsibility, as if she believed she had bought my healing with a crumpled bill. Weeks passed. My body steadied. The fog lifted. I took a few shifts at the diner again, building stamina in secret. The girls started sounding like children again, but the question never left me. Why? Every new envelope dragged my mind back to the iron bench by the bay, to the man Lily had approached with $5 and a steady voice. The second time I saw Damien Crow, it wasn't at the harbor. It was outside Lily's school. It was 3:40 p.m., when kids spilled through the gate, and parents formed a loose crowd. Sophie stood beside me, her small hand wrapped around mine. Lily emerged with her backpack bouncing, and for a moment, her face looked soft, almost normal, because she saw me. Then the air shifted. Across the street, a black town car idled at the curb. A suited man stood near it, not blocking anyone, just watching with the calm of someone paid to notice everything. Damien stepped into view as if he had been waiting for the right second. No drama, no threat, just presence. His gaze went to Lily first, not me, not in a hungry way, in a careful way, like he was checking whether the fear in her shoulders had eased. Lily didn't run. She didn't wave. She just kept walking, eyes forward, like she was following a rule she'd invented. Every instinct told me to turn away and pretend I hadn't seen him, but healing had given me enough strength to choose a confrontation. I sent Lily and Sophie toward the office window and crossed the street alone. Damien didn't move toward me. He waited, giving me the final decision. When I stopped a few feet away, I felt that invisible perimeter again, the space around him that the world seemed to respect. I demanded an explanation, not with quoted words, but with the way my shoulders squared and my voice came out steadier than I felt. I made it clear I had traced the pattern. The clinic, the medication, the lease, the quiet protection I kept sensing at the edges of our days. Damien answered with restraint that felt almost scarier than rage. He made it plain that Lily's $5 had not purchased a favor. It had purchased his word. He kept his word, especially when a child had been brave enough to ask. He implied that children were not collateral and never would be, not in his world, not under his watch. Relief hit me first, then fear, because it meant he had rules, and rules meant power. I told him I wasn't his project. I set boundaries with shaking honesty. I would not let my daughters be pulled into his orbit. I would not accept help that demanded illegal repayment. I would not be asked to hide the ugly parts of his world with my silence, and I needed the right to walk away. Damien listened like my conditions weren't an insult. He gave a single nod, and it felt like an agreement stamped in ink. Then he offered something else, presented as it would come through legitimate channels. A scholarship nomination for Lily, an advanced program, tuition covered, a door that opened for her mind instead of her fear. My throat tightened. I pictured Lily being praised for grades, not for surviving. I couldn't trust my own voice enough to answer. Damien's attention flicked past me for a second, toward the corner of the street. When his eyes returned, his expression had hardened. He warned me without turning it into a threat. Dylan being gone was stable, but attention was dangerous. People noticed patterns. Someone else might decide to test the new luck around our family. The town car door opened behind him, silent and waiting. I walked back to my daughters with my legs unsteady, carrying gratitude I hadn't asked for, and fear I couldn't set down. That evening, Lily's backpack held a sealed envelope from the school office, addressed to me. Inside was the first page of scholarship paperwork, and the terrifying certainty that whatever Damien Crow had started, it still wasn't finished with Dylan. Stability arrived the way sunlight does after a storm, slow, suspicious, and easy to ruin if you stare at it too hard. My mornings stopped being a battlefield. The medication from the program steadied my hands and cleared the fog enough for me to pack lunches without forgetting where I'd put the bread. Sophie started asking for silly things again, like heart-shaped pancakes. Because she had finally learned that my body wasn't always going to betray me. Lily didn't ask for silly things. She watched, tracked, and kept her backpack zipped as secrets lived inside it. I went back to the diner 3 days a week, choosing the morning shift so I could be home when the girls got out of school. I worked under fluorescent lights and the smell of coffee, pretending my life was ordinary, while my mind stayed tuned to the smallest changes in the room. Some habits don't disappear just because the threat does. The scholarship paperwork for Lily moved forward in neat steps, stamped, signed, and filed. The school counselor sent forms home in a folder that looked like every other school folder, but I handled it like it was fragile glass. A better school meant a better future, but it also meant visibility, and visibility felt like a beacon. That was the price of being safe. You start to notice how many eyes exist in the world. It began with small things. A car I didn't recognize parked near our building 2 nights in a row. A man in a baseball cap was standing too long by the mailboxes, staring at the directory like he couldn't read. A question from a new staff member at Lily's school, who asked, too casually, whether Lily's father was still in the picture. I told myself it was normal curiosity. I told myself I was paranoid. Then, on a Tuesday, at 2:20 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It wasn't dramatic. It implied that Dylan wasn't gone, only repositioned. It hinted that he knew where we lived now, and it suggested that I owed him for the life that had improved without him. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might throw up. I didn't respond. I took a screenshot. I wrote the time down on a legal pad and circled it twice, like that could hold the fear in place. I checked the front door locks. I checked the window latches. I checked the girls' rooms even though they weren't home yet. Like seeing their beds would remind me what I was protecting. By 3:10 p.m., I had called the detective whose card was still in my drawer. He sounded tired, the way people do when their panic interrupts their day. He told me that missing adults sometimes resurfaced, and that one message wasn't enough to reopen a case. He advised me to document everything and look into a restraining order. The words, restraining order, should have comforted me. Instead, they made my throat tighten. A restraining order was paper. Dylan had never respected paper, and Damien Crow's world didn't run on paper either, not the way mine did. That night, after the girls fell asleep, I forced myself to do the practical things I'd avoided for years. I called a legal aid office and scheduled a consultation. I gathered every old text Dylan had ever sent, every voicemail I still had, every bill he'd put in my name. I started a folder labeled evidence, and I hated how official it made my life sound. I also made a plan with Lily, careful to keep it age-appropriate. I told her, in my calmest voice, that if anything ever felt wrong, she should take Sophie to the neighbor across the hall and ask for help immediately. I reminded her that she was not responsible for fighting adults. I watched her swallow the instinct to argue, and I wondered how long it would take before she believed me. The next day, the strange car disappeared. The man by the mailboxes didn't come back. The school staff member acted as if the conversation had never happened. Even the air in the hallway felt less tense, like whatever had been probing our lives had decided it didn't like what it found. I didn't celebrate. Relief felt reckless. I just kept breathing and kept moving, letting the girls' laughter fill the rooms I'd once thought were temporary. I started carrying a phone charger, a spare key, and a folded emergency list in my purse every single day. A week later, another envelope arrived, this one sealed with the school's logo. Inside was an invitation to a spring recognition night for scholarship finalists. The event would be held at the community center at 7 p.m., with photos and certificates, and applause. I stared at the invitation until the words blurred, because I understood the danger hiding inside a good thing. If we went, we stepped into the light, and if we stepped into the light, someone might finally see who had been keeping us safe. I almost didn't go. I stood in our bathroom with my hands on the sink, staring at my own reflection as if it belonged to a stranger. The invitation sat on the counter beside a hairbrush and a tube of toothpaste, looking harmless. A school recognition night, a certificate, a few photos. But all I could think about was how attention worked, how it traveled, how it found cracks. Then I heard Sophie in the living room, humming to herself while she tried to button her cardigan. I heard Lily correcting her gently, the way a 9-year-old shouldn't have to, and something in me hardened. Trauma had already stolen enough. It had stolen years of my body, my confidence, my peace. I was not going to let it steal my daughter's pride, too. So I went. At 6:50 p.m., we walked into the community center with Lily's hair braided neatly and Sophie's dress slightly crooked because she insisted on dressing herself. I wore a simple navy sweater and jeans, nothing that asked to be noticed. My heart still beat like I was walking into a courtroom. The room was bright and loud in that safe, ordinary way families create. Folding chairs, a small stage with a microphone, paper banners made by children, the smell of sheet cake and coffee, parents laughing too loudly, teachers moving with clipboards, little kids weaving between legs like impatient cats. I should have relaxed. Instead, my eyes kept scanning. I noticed exits. I noticed the way the doors opened inward. I noticed a man near the back wall who didn't smile when everyone else did. I noticed a car idling outside through the glass, headlights cutting a pale line across the parking lot. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number again. A short message, worded like a dare. It implied I was getting bold. It implied I was forgetting my place. It implied Dylan had not been the only person who ever watched me. My mouth went dry. I slipped the phone into my pocket without showing Lily, because this night was hers. I forced my shoulders down. I forced my face into calm. I focused on Sophie climbing into her chair like it was a throne. Lily sat straighter than usual, her knees pressed together, her hands folded in her lap. She tried to look uninterested, but I could feel the nerves vibrating off her like static. I reached over and squeezed her fingers once, the smallest reminder that she wasn't alone. The principal spoke. Names were read. Applause rose and fell in waves. When Lily's name was called, my chest tightened so hard it hurt. She walked to the stage like she'd rehearsed it in her mind 100 times. Not timid, not arrogant, just steady. The same steadiness she'd used with a crumpled bill on a waterfront bench months ago. I watched a certificate placed into her hands. I watched her accept it with a nod that looked too grown up. I watched her face soften for half a second as the room clapped for her, and that second felt like a miracle. Sophie clapped the loudest, grinning as Lily had just won an Oscar. I clapped too, but my eyes kept drifting to the edges. After the ceremony, families crowded around tables, photos, hugs, teachers telling parents how proud they were. Lily's counselor approached us and spoke in that warm professional tone adults use when they're offering something important. She referenced Lily's application packet, the scholarship committee, the next steps, and the timeline. I nodded like this was normal. Inside, my mind was screaming that nothing about this was normal. A woman I didn't recognize drifted close while I was distracted by Sophie trying to steal frosting from a cupcake. She asked casual questions about how we had managed the move, how Lily's grades had stayed so strong, and how I had gotten into the clinic program so quickly. The questions were polite, but the curiosity behind them felt sharp. I answered carefully, keeping everything vague, keeping my voice light. I made it sound like luck and paperwork and timing, because that was the only story I could safely tell. The woman smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Shorter, meaner. It implied someone could make Lily's little award night turn into a very different kind of memory. My stomach flipped. My hands started to shake, and I hated that my body still tried to betray me at the worst moments. Before panic could crack my face open, someone stepped between the woman and me. A staff member, I think. Or maybe just a volunteer. A man with a calm posture and an expression that didn't match the cheerful chaos of the room. He spoke to the woman in a low voice, and whatever he said made her blink like she'd been surprised. She nodded once, stiffly, and drifted away. The air changed again. Through the glass doors, I saw the idling car outside pull forward, then turn out of the lot as if it had decided it had stayed long enough. My breath came back in slow pieces. And then, near the far side of the room, I saw him. Damien Crowe stood half in shadow near a hallway, dressed as if he belonged at a charity event or a funeral. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't moving toward me. He was simply watching, his gaze flicking once to Lily with the certificate clutched to her chest, then back to me. No triumph, no claim, just a quiet confirmation that he had expected the risk and planned for it. Something hot rose in my throat. Anger, gratitude, fear, all tangled together. I looked away first because I refused to make this night about him. On the drive home, Lily held her certificate against her stomach like it was armor. Sophie fell asleep with cupcake crumbs on her cheeks. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting headlights to follow us. Nothing did. When we got home, I emptied Lily's backpack to keep myself busy. That's when I found a folded note tucked inside her folder, pressed between scholarship forms. No signature, just a single line, written in clean block letters, telling me the committee would approve her scholarship by next week, and that transportation and uniforms would be covered. My knees went weak, because it meant someone had reached into a school system as easily as Dylan once reached into my life. And while I was still holding that note, my phone chimed with an email notification from a legal aid office. A court hearing notice had been filed under Dylan's name. Custody review. A date and a time. A reminder that even when you step into the light, shadows can still find you. The custody notice arrived on a Thursday, tucked between a grocery flyer and Lily's scholarship packet, as it belonged in our normal life. I saw the court seal first, and my body reacted before my mind could. My hands went cold. My stomach hollowed out. For a few seconds, I just stood in the doorway with the mail pressed to my chest, listening to Sophie hum in the living room. I made myself move like a mother instead of a frightened woman. I set the envelope on the counter, got the girls out the door, and acted normal. At 8:15 a.m., when I came back to an empty apartment and the quiet finally had room to breathe, I opened it. It wasn't written in sloppy rage. It was clean, typed, polite. Dylan was requesting a custody review. The filing claimed he had reestablished stability and wanted time with his children. The hearing date was printed in bold, and the courthouse address felt familiar in the way nightmares do. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat down and let anger replace panic, because anger at least had edges I could hold. By 9:10 a.m., I had called legal aid. I explained the history in plain sentences: intimidation, financial control, isolation, and the way my illness had been used as proof I couldn't handle life alone. The intake worker didn't promise miracles. She gave me an appointment and told me to gather documentation. So I built a timeline like I was assembling a lifeboat. I printed screenshots of the unknown number messages. I pulled medical records. I requested school notes about Lily's past anxiety and the improvements teachers had noticed since we moved. I stacked everything in a folder and labeled it evidence. I added bank statements showing the months Dylan drained my account and then blamed me for being broke. I included a note from my neurologist about how stress worsened my symptoms, and a letter from our landlord confirming our steady rent payments. It felt humiliating to prove my worth on paper, but I did it to strangers. The hardest part was telling Lily. I needed her to stay a child, but I also needed her to understand why I was suddenly moving like someone planning for war. I told her Dylan was trying to use the court to get access to us again. I promised her she didn't have to carry it, and I reminded her that her job was to keep learning and keep being 9. She listened with that old, solemn focus, and I hated how familiar it looked. Sophie was easier to protect because she didn't understand what custody meant beyond home. I kept her world warm on purpose. 2 days later, the twist hit that made my blood run colder than the notice itself. A second envelope arrived from a downtown law firm. Dylan had hired a private attorney, the kind of letterhead that made you feel guilty before you even read it. The letter claimed Dylan had completed counseling, secured employment, and had family support. It also named Marla Hensley as a relative prepared to testify about my instability. Marla was Dylan's aunt, the woman who used to call my medication a crutch and my exhaustion laziness. If she were stepping into court, Dylan wasn't just returning. He was rewriting the story. That night, after the girls fell asleep, I thought about Damien Crowe and his warning about attention. I wondered what Dylan had been doing in the dark while we were rebuilding in the light. I also wondered what would happen if I asked Damien for help. The thought made my stomach twist. I didn't want dependence. I didn't want my daughters growing up believing safety came from a dangerous man's favor. I wanted a life I could defend with my own hands and a court record that looked clean. So I made a different call instead. I asked the clinic's patient advocate if they partnered with any domestic violence legal programs or if they had any resources for women dealing with custody intimidation. 3 days later, I got an email introducing me to an attorney named Claire Jensen, a volunteer through a hospital-affiliated program. She offered to meet at 2:30 p.m. the following Monday. Claire didn't speak like a savior. She spoke like a strategist. She read my timeline, asked hard questions, and explained what mattered: consistency, documentation, the children's best interest, and credible fear. She helped me file for a protective order based on the messages and prepared a motion requesting supervised visitation if the court considered granting Dylan anything at all. Then something strange happened. Something that felt like Damien's world without looking like it. Dylan's attorney filed a withdrawal, citing a conflict of interest. The hearing wasn't canceled, but it was rescheduled. Claire told me conflicts had happened, and that I shouldn't read meaning into timing. I nodded, but my skin prickled anyway. I didn't ask questions I couldn't afford to hear answers to. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed the girls in their cleanest clothes like we were going to church. I dropped Sophie off with a neighbor and walked Lily to school with my hand wrapped around hers. I told her I would be back by lunch and forced my voice steady enough that she nodded. At 11:45 a.m., I stepped into the courthouse alone. People murmured in clusters, clutching folders like shields. I held my own folder tight and kept walking. Then I looked up. Across the corridor, near the courtroom door, Dylan stood in a crisp shirt with that practiced expression, as if he belonged there, and he smiled at me like we were still married. The courtroom smelled like paper and old coffee, a place where lives get reduced to exhibits. I kept my eyes on the bench, not on Dylan, because looking at him always tried to wake the old reflex of shrinking. I sat beside Claire Jensen with my evidence folder on my lap, spine straight. I was here for Lily and Sophie. That was the only reason I needed. By 12:15 p.m., the clerk called our case. I stood on legs that felt borrowed. Dylan rose too, polished and calm, dressed like a man who wanted to be mistaken for safe. He carried a thin file, like he could erase years with a few clean pages. In front of the judge, he played the role he had practiced on me for years. He described himself as stable and reformed. He implied I was unstable. He referenced my illness as if it were proof of incompetence, not a condition I managed with discipline. He framed my move as secrecy and my boundaries as spite. I listened without interrupting, because arguing with a performer only gives him a bigger stage. Claire didn't argue. She organized. She presented the timeline the way I had built it at my kitchen table. The custody filing, the anonymous messages, the probing questions at Lily's school event, and the pressure that arrived every time I stepped toward independence. She summarized teacher notes about Lily's past hypervigilance and the improvements since Dylan's absence. She explained that Sophie's sleep and behavior stabilized once our home stopped vibrating with fear. When Marla Hensley took the stand, she tried to narrate my life as if she had lived it. She painted me as fragile and over-medicated. She suggested the children needed Dylan's structure. Claire's questions were calm, but they tightened like a knot. Marla admitted she hadn't seen the girls in over a year. She admitted she didn't know Lily's teacher's name and didn't know Sophie's pediatrician. Then she admitted Dylan had called her 2 weeks earlier to ask her to testify and to remind her that family loyalty mattered more than facts. The judge's attention sharpened. Then Claire introduced the piece that made my throat tighten. I had preserved the anonymous messages with timestamps. A digital forensics consultant reviewed them through a domestic violence legal network. The report traced the number to a prepaid phone. That phone had been funded by a prepaid card reloaded twice at the same convenience store near Dylan's last known job. Store records confirmed the reload times. Security footage showed Dylan at the counter on both dates. Dylan tried to interrupt, but the judge stopped him. For the first time, his mask slipped. I saw irritation, then fear, then a quick attempt to rebuild calm. He had expected to win by sounding reasonable. He hadn't planned for evidence that was boring, factual, and undeniable. The judge asked me questions directly. I answered with steady sentences. I described how Dylan used money and silence as weapons. I described threats about taking the girls if I ever asked for help. I described the nights I slept in my clothes because it felt safer than being caught unprepared. I described how Lily learned to read my breathing like weather, and how Sophie learned to hide her toys when footsteps got heavy. I didn't beg. I told the truth like a record. When the judge delivered the decision, my lungs forgot how to work for a second. The custody request was denied. The court granted a protective order barring Dylan from contacting me directly or indirectly, including through third parties. Any future petition would require documented completion of a certified intervention program, verified stable housing, and court-approved supervised visitation in a secure facility after an independent evaluation. The judge warned Dylan that further harassment could trigger criminal consequences. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was real. I signed nothing except a promise to heal. Outside the courtroom, my knees shook so hard I had to sit. Claire guided me to a bench and reminded me to breathe. She told me we would keep copies of everything and follow the order precisely. She said I did well because I stayed honest. When I stepped into the pale afternoon, sunlight hit my face like permission. Across the street, a black car sat in a legal parking spot, engine off. Damien Crowe stood beside it, not close enough to claim me, not far enough to pretend he wasn't there. He didn't approach. He didn't smile. He simply watched until my gaze met his, and then he gave a small nod. I didn't go to him. I went to my life. I picked Sophie up first, holding her too tight until she wiggled and laughed. I met Lily at the school gate, and when she saw my face, she understood without details. Her shoulders dropped, just a little, like a backpack finally set down. In the weeks that followed, the scholarship confirmation arrived, covering uniforms and transportation. Lily started her new school with her chin lifted. Sophie slept through the night more often than not. My body stabilized in quiet increments, the kind of healing that doesn't make headlines but changes everything. I kept my boundaries. I accepted help only when it came through legitimate doors and didn't demand a piece of my soul in return. Damien stayed at the edge of my world, a dark silhouette that respected the line I drew. The lesson I carried wasn't that monsters become angels. It was that courage can look like a child saving lunch money, and it can look like a mother walking into court with trembling hands and refusing to shrink. Help can come from unexpected places, but freedom lasts when you keep your hands on the steering wheel. If this story made you feel something, please like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and comment where you're listening from. Your support keeps these stories alive.